always cool to see another rigs out there.
Good morning, everybody. All right, go for it, Dan.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you. I'm Dan Yeager, the Executive Director of NEMA, and really happy that you're here today as part of New England Museums Week. This is stop 4 on our tour this week, and it's really been terrific to really get the energy of folks that are interested in advocacy and speaking up for museums and cultural attractions and so forth in our region. We're a small group today, so I'm happy to have everybody sort of introduce themselves quick so we know who's in the room. And if you don't feel like doing it on camera or verbally, just drop it into the chat where you're calling in from, and we'll take it from there. But why don't we start out, and we'll wrap up with the team back to me. But why don't we start out? I'm just looking around the screen. I see Luis. Say hi and where you're calling in from.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Luis Vasquez. I'm the Museum Collections Manager with the Rhode Island Historical Society, and happy to be here.
Excellent. Good to see you. Joseph.
I am the Joe Souza. I am the Director of Development at the Sailing Museum in Newport.
The new place.
The new place, yeah.
Linda.
I'm Linda Riggs. I'm Office Administrator at the Sailing Museum in Newport. So we're just getting started here.
Good. Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia D'Amico. I'm the Marketing and PR Manager for the RISD Museum.
Excellent, thanks. And Peter, I see you on the line. Yeah, there you go. Been attending a few of these. Good to see you here. And we'll go with the team here. Heather, you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Heather Riggs. It's always good to see another Riggs out there. I'm Director of Administration here at NEMA.
Right. And Meg, why don't you say hi? And
Hey there, I'm Meg Winnicates, Director of Engagement for NEMA. Very glad to have you all here as, the team advocacy wonk. So on to Scarlett.
Thanks, Meg. I'm Scarlett Hoey. I'm Director of Membership and Development at NEMA. I am at home in Worcester, Massachusetts, homelands of the Nipmuc Nation people and their allied tribes, past and present. And I do want to say that NEMA recognizes that our organization and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society, which continues the exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples throughout New England. And you can use the Indigenous Peoples land map, which I'll drop in the chat here, to locate the lands where your museum is located and where you're zooming in from today. So I'll hand it back to you, Dan.
and we have a couple of other folks joining us. If you want to, Elizabeth and Kathy, if you want to say hi and where you're calling in from, or if you don't feel like talking, just drop it into the chat and we'll move forward. There's Kathy. Hey.
Clearly, I'm having technical difficulties this morning, which is why I'm a few minutes late. Great to be here. Kathy Saunders. I work at Lippett House Museum, and I am just sitting here in Providence at my home at the moment. Great to be with you all.
And recently a board member of NEMA for many, many years. So
yes, I know. It feels good to be back.
Change, right? Elizabeth, you want to say hi or just drop it into the chat if you don't feel like. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, there we go. Hey, Elizabeth. So Todd, we're going to introduce you. I'm going to throw it over to Meg, though, to just sort of recap the day and stuff, and then you can mention, and well, actually, Todd, go ahead. Why don't you say who you are? Sorry, I'm complicating things here. Mute. There you go.
Hi, I'm Todd Trebor. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm the organization's program director at the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. And I'm coming to you today from Providence, Rhode Island, the ancestral homelands of the Narragansett Nation.
Excellent, thanks. And Todd's going to be our guest speaker in a moment. All right. Anyway, thanks very much for being with us here today. Just to, one thought here is the importance of advocacy. And yesterday, as we were coming into this meeting with our group from Connecticut, I had just watched President Zelensky's address to Congress and thinking about the world historical moment that we're in, and it moved me, like it moved a lot of people, to watch this. But it dawned on me about our part that we play as museums and cultural facilities in our culture, and how important it is that what we do. And I don't know, it still moves me a lot to think, these small things that we do, advocating for our little places, our little postage stamp in the world, to make sure that people know about us and provide us with proper support and whatever. We're playing a part in a much bigger fabric of our culture. And sometimes we lose sight of that, the day-to-dayness of what it is that we do. It's like humdrum and problems and, I got to deal with this and that and the other thing. But, I'm encouraging everybody to not lose sight of the fact that we're part of this bigger picture. That what we do is, as cultural professionals, really matters in the big scheme of things. And I think that uplifting that through our advocacy is really, an important thing to keep ourselves motivated and energized on a regular basis. So that's my message to you, bringing that energy into this meeting, and of course, what it is that you do on a regular basis. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Meg and be quiet, and let's get going on advocacy.
All right. Thanks so much, Dan. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's definitely, with everything that's been in the news around, bills getting passed in Idaho that would allow them to throw librarians and museum workers in jail for teaching difficult topics, and the fact that in one of the towns in Ukraine, when the Russian forces rolled in to occupy, the first person they arrested was the director of the history museum. I feel like, it is incredibly important for us to keep standing up for why it is that museums are important, because there are people out there who don't like what we do and want to stop us from doing it. So certainly, thank you all for being here. As one of our guest speakers earlier in the week mentioned, 90% of advocacy is showing up. So thank you very much for being here. You are a small but mighty group, and I really appreciate it. So thank you for joining us for our second ever New England Museum Week. And my job today is to do just a quick run through in case you were not able to attend advocacy camp or review any of the materials that we sent out in advance of this week, just to go over a few things to help you navigate advocacy, particularly online, here in 2022. So why is it important to be showing up this year? There are, of course, the eternal three things that are getting talked about pretty much every year in every state. People are always talking about the budget. People are always talking about tax policies. People are always talking about education policies. But this year, there are a number of other things that mean staying engaged is really important, not just this week, but going forward into the rest of 2022. So there is continuing distribution happening of the federal COVID relief packages, where the money is still getting distributed. Various city and town level governments are starting to talk about revitalization initiatives, and it's really important that cultural organizations are part of those discussions. So it's really important for you to be kind of keeping an eye out to see what's happening locally, that you could be making sure you're getting involved in those discussions. Midterm federal elections are coming up. So if you have even the slightest interest in getting your organization involved in doing things like, say, voter registration, this is a really good year to get on top of that. And most states in New England are having either or both legislative or gubernatorial elections this year. So again, things that it's really worth remaining engaged beyond today. And for those of you who may be newer to advocacy, this is my confidence boosting slide to remind you that advocacy is just along the sliding scale of ways we interact with the public already. So you already have most of the skills you need in order to be able to do this. You start with public relations. Hi, we're here. This is what we're up to. Then moving on to slightly more in-depth education, teaching people about something related to your mission. Advocacy is just another kind of education where you're specifically talking about, here's where our organization and our mission intersects with civic life and public policy. And then the step beyond that, which is the step that scares a lot of people, is lobbying. But I'm here to tell you that it's not scary and you are allowed to do it. And the only thing that turns something from advocacy, which is solely about education, like here's why this matters, lobbying is taking the next step and saying, and therefore we would like you to do X about it. So there are a couple of simple guidelines to make sure, because I know a lot of folks who work in museums and other kinds of nonprofits are worried about getting in trouble for lobbying. And the restrictions vary a little state to state, but the general rule of thumb is if you are spending less than 10% of your paid time actually talking to members of elected positions, then you are not a lobbyist and you are not in trouble. So you can say, as a nonprofit, this is what's important. This is why we care. This is how this impacts our institution. All of that is advocacy, and you can do as much of that as you want to. No time restrictions or anything else. You can ask for support. You can say, this matters to our organization, and if you support this bill, it will have this kind of positive effect on us, or this matters to our institution because if this bill passes, it will have an incredibly negative effect and we would really like you to vote against it. You know, you can say that without getting in any kind of trouble at all. The two major rules of thumb to remember that you want to like steer really clear of is you can talk about issues until you're blue in the face, but you cannot talk about people. You cannot say, we hope our members will vote for this person in this election because they support the things that are important to us. You can say, these are the things that are important to us, and we hope you will choose to support a candidate who also supports these ideas, but you cannot name names. And you have to remain completely nonpartisan. So any kind of offering that you're giving to one candidate or one party, you have to offer equally to the other. So if say in a campaign, somebody contacted you and wanted to run an event at your location, you can say yes, but then if somebody who is running in opposition contacts you the next week and also wants to run an event at your location, you also have to say yes. You can send out candidate questionnaires and then publish the results, but you have to make sure that you publish them entirely. You cannot, you know, selectively edit them. You cannot only put out a few of them. You can say, like, we sent out questionnaires to all 4 of the candidates in XYZ race, and 3 of them responded, and here are their answers. But again, you know, then you have to let people make their own decisions about, therefore, who they should support. If you want to be advocating as an individual, you can still say, like, and I work for this kind of organization and this matters to me. But if you want to make sure that you're separating yourself out from your organization, remember that you need to be emailing or tweeting from your own accounts, not from your work accounts, and you need to do it on your own time. So lunch breaks, or if you work flex time and therefore, you know, it can be during normal work hours, but they may not be your work hours, that's all fine. And then if more than one of you are advocating for your organization, just make sure that you're communicating with your colleagues so that you are all putting forth the same message and not muddying the waters. There are a lot of kinds of ways to reach out to your elected officials, and virtual contact still counts. Fortunately, most state houses are opening back up now. Massachusetts, I think, was the last one in possibly the entire United States to be open to the public, and they opened like this week. So you can be seeing people in person, but all of these other ways still matter. Social media, make sure that if you are trying to reach out to people that you're actually using their handles to get their attention. Virtual town halls and listening sessions are great to try to make sure that you participate in. Sign yourself up for your legislators' newsletters, get their kind of info contact addresses added to your mailing lists. You can email them, you can call the office, you can set up virtual meetings. All of those count as much as like walking into the State House and shaking somebody's hand does. When you're doing a social media post, again, confidence boosting, you already know how to do this. Pretend it's an exhibit label. Make sure that you are using your punchiest, most memorable, clearest ways to convey your message. So pick your really strong statistics that are going to stick in people's heads, like 60% of arts and culture travelers, or rather, sorry, 76% of travelers participate in cultural and heritage activities, and they spend 60% more money than other kinds of travelers. So if you're trying to talk about revitalization efforts, for instance, and bringing back tourism, you want to say like, hey, our museum deserves a place at the table because the people who come to visit us are going to be bringing money back to all these other places downtown as well. Here's another really good number. 96% of voters in a 2017 poll run by AAM said that they support government funding for museums, and 96% say they also support legislators who support museum funding. So that's a good and useful thing. And all of those are really good for providing context, but it's also really important to remember that the power of your story is in your specific personal details. Make sure they're informative, make sure they're timely. Stories that you're telling from 5 years ago are going to be less impactful than stories you're telling from the last 2 years, because as we all know, the world changes rapidly, and especially in the last 3 years, the world has changed a lot. So be as up to date as possible with your stories. You do not have to do this all alone. You do not have to start from scratch. We have templates available that you can build off of. So on our website, we have a Work Your Words worksheet that will give you a way to think about like 3 to 5 punchy sentences to tell your story. Here's where I'm coming from. Here's what happened. Here's why it matters. Here's what I need you to do. We also have impact statement templates for different sorts, in addition to the bigger impact advocacy camp session that I ran. So you can go back and rewatch that if you want. We've also got the toolkit that you can build your own off of. And we are not the only ones who are here to help. AAM has great references and resources for advocacy, Americans for the Arts, ASLH, your state level organizations such as Todd at RISCA, who we'll be talking in a moment, has lots of great information for you. And we have been dropping some of our favorite resources into the museum's advocacy and New England Museum Week hashtags all week and in the weeks running up to today. So I encourage you to kind of scroll back through there and see what's up. If you are doing advocacy posts today, I strongly recommend and ask very politely that you use the museum's advocacy and New England Museum Week hashtags in your posts so that we can track them, because as the event organizers, it helps us be able to track engagement and figure out kind of how far did this social media advocacy campaign spread, et cetera. So please remember to do that if you're doing your advocacy online. And again, because text advocacy, whether you're thinking about letters or a special social media, it's really important to think about minding your A's. Without vocal inflections involved, attitude can come across a little strange. So really think about what language you're using, try to stay positive. Think very closely about your audience, because you might be advocating towards your members and saying, please write to your legislators to talk about why this is important for museums and why you support our organization. Or you might be talking directly to a legislator's office, et cetera. So think about how you want to craft different posts for different audiences, and think about your asks. Part of advocacy is asking people to support this or remember this when it comes to the polls in a few months, or share these stories, or, hey, we want to be able to collect a whole bunch of stories about our educational impact on the state of Rhode Island in the last 50 years. If you took a school field trip in the 70s to our organization, tell us all about it. If you came in the 90s, tell us all about it here. And, try to, again, make sure you're making an ask to get people engaged. When you are reaching out to your legislators, a little research goes a long way. Have a quick scan of their social media feeds, see what they're talking about now and what matters to them. Take a quick look at their bios on like the State House webpage and see what committees they're assigned to, what bills they've sponsored. That'll give you a sense of what they're interested in, and that can help you frame your approach to them. For instance, if you've got a legislator who is clearly really interested in small businesses, you can talk about how, in fact, most museums are small businesses. And make sure that you yourself are present in the conversation, because your passions and fears are super compelling. The things that matter to you matter to others also. And just as a reminder, this is like a stepping stone. Advocacy is a long game. It can be kind of slow. You're really working towards building relationships. So if you tweet at your legislator and they like your tweet or they respond, then follow up later, like next week, with an email saying, thanks so much for engaging with us during New England Museum Week. We'd like to invite you to come visit our site and see what we're up to, et cetera. We want to talk to you about how we can be a resource for the kinds of things your office might need to help you make decisions about cultural organizations and funding and whatever else. And make sure that you're thanking them both privately and publicly for their support. All right, here's my favorite number. 100% of you are now ready to get out there and be advocates. And don't forget your caffeine. I did on Monday and it was a sad, sad day. Poor Maine. They did not get my full me because I did not have my tea. So I am now very happy to go ahead and pass it over to Todd to give you the rundown on what's happening in Rhode Island specifically. If you've got any questions for me, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will try to answer them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll have some time for questions at the end. Thanks a lot, and all yours, Todd.
Great, thank you, Meg. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Todd Trebor from the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint that will just guide what I'm going to present to you all this morning. There we go. All right. Very happy to be here today and talk with you all about arts and cultural advocacy. Thank you all again for attending and for the fantastic work you do to support the culture and cultural infrastructure in Rhode Island. So a little bit about the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. Meg asked me to introduce a bit about ourselves and programs that we might have that are relevant to you all before talking more about advocacy and what's kind of being discussed at the State House level. We are a state agency. We are a part of state government. We are an independent agency within the Department of Administration. We grant out a mix of funds. About a third of what we grant out is federally sourced funds from the National Endowment for the Arts. About 2/3 of what we grant out is from the Rhode Island State Legislature, the General Assembly. We're charged with stewarding the arts and culture ecosystem. So we do that obviously through grants, as I mentioned, but the way our positions are structured is that we are individuals who are each responsible for a subsector of the arts and culture ecosystem. So I'm the organizations person, and we both manage grants, and then we provide programs, services, staff support, et cetera, as needed for our given subsector, depending on what their needs are. So we're a very external focused agency. Before the pandemic, I spent a lot of my time meeting with people in person, in their spaces or at coffee shops, hearing what they were doing, being a thought partner in projects that they were, ruminating on, and then making connections as needed and as helpful to ensure that people doing arts and culture programs, whether or not they were arts and culture institutions, had the support needed to do something awesome and excellent. That's me. I'm going to talk a little bit about one grant program we have that put on your radar that will be relevant to you all, even though you might not be arts institutions per se. We have project grants for organizations that are grants of up to $3,000 to support arts and culture projects that are relevant and meaningful to a Rhode Island community or communities. So intentionally pretty broad. Anything from festivals to, projects that happen with small groups of people, clay studios that are run by social service nonprofits for adults with developmental disabilities, or small kind of group lessons on dance traditions from culturally specific organizations and institutions. It's our entry-level grant program for organizations. The grant application itself is relatively simply laid out with that in mind, with lots of resources supporting applicants in their completion of it. Many of you are from larger institutions, some of you are development directors. It wouldn't be a heavy lift for you all if that was something of interest, but we do provide robust application support as a state agency for our grant programs, because we view ourselves as not just helping people in their writing of grants to us, but we view our role as helping institutions and organizations and individuals build their grant writing skills just in general, and then connecting them with other resources where possible. Any nonprofit can apply for these grants. It just has to be an arts and culture project. It's something we're very proud of at the State Arts Council. Some other state arts councils focus it on just arts and culture organizations being the entities that can apply for their grants. 2 deadlines a year for this program, April 1st and October 1st. April 1st supports programs happening in the state's next fiscal year, so anytime between July 1st of, in this case, 2022 and June 30th of 2023. October 1st is for the latter half of the state's fiscal year, so between, in this case, January 1st of 2023 and June 30th of 2023. Other things that are relevant to you all, perhaps both grant programs and other things that we do. We have project grants in healthcare and project grants for education. These are for, typically a school would apply for a project grant for education, or a school district to bring in an artist or a nonprofit to do a residency style model type of work with them. At project grants in healthcare, similarly a healthcare institution, and we're pretty broad on what that means. Hospitals, hospice centers, senior living centers, et cetera, apply, and again, bring either an individual or an organization in to do some work there. I believe the requirement is in partnership with a clinician. Both these programs are going to look different next year. They're being restructured, but they both, or I'm sorry, Project Grants in Healthcare has an April 1st deadline this year. Project Grants for Education has an October 1st deadline. You'll be getting links from me as well as my email in the chat once I'm done presenting, since I can't do that at the same time. And you can follow up with me about any of those things if you're interested. We also have a general operating support for organizations program. As it says, you have to be an arts and culture organization or a culturally specific organization to be eligible. And you must first apply for project grants for organizations for 2 to 3 years before you're eligible for general operating support. Other things we also offer, we have peer support calls for arts and culture organizations, about 2 to 3 a month. Some of them are pretty open and I facilitate them and they occur via Zoom. Great way to meet other people and great way to kind of voice your concerns or hear what's happening. Others have a topic focus to them that is either provided by an outside speaker or a co-facilitator who works with me to facilitate the conversation. Typically, these occur on Fridays between 12 and 1 p.m. Again, you can reach out to me if you have any interest in hearing more about that. And then, like I said, an information resource and thought partner. So if you're developing a project or a program and you want a thought partner in that, happy to do that. If you're looking for artists to be engaged with work you're doing, that's also something we'd be helpful in as well. One thing to highlight, we're doing an equity and access workshop series for small, mid-size, and volunteer-led organizations, intended really for any organization with a budget under $500,000, but it could be beneficial for any. We were hearing from our organizations through surveys and conversations that particularly the small ones were struggling with how to operationalize diversity, equity, inclusion, and access organizationally with limited resources, perhaps no staff. What would that mean and look like for them and kind of the sea of resources that they're swimming in right now? So Dr. Bria Heidelberg, who is with ISO Arts Consulting, will be co-presented with Arts Equity Rhode Island by Riska for 2 workshops. And then Arts Equity Rhode Island will be doing 2 workshops on accessibility, the second of which focuses on working with neurodiverse populations. One last thing before I talk more about advocacy. You all might be aware of the Humanities Council. They are our sister agency. They are not a part of state government. They're an independent 501c3 nonprofit that grants out federal funds that are sourced from the NEA. They have mini grants for humanities programs quarterly for $2,000, and they have a major grant annually with a required letter of intent for projects, and they can request up to $12,000. Again, you can email me about that. I'm friends with the person who's my equivalent over there. We're actually neighbors. I'm happy to make that contact if you don't already have it. So state level advocacy and why it's important. So first off, just the kind of bills that are currently being discussed in the legislature that may or may not be relevant to you all. One is the state budget, which includes obviously the State Arts Council's budget in it as well. We actually have our budget hearing next Tuesday about our budget. Reminder for you all, I should have said this beforehand, you know, the legislature in Rhode Island, as you're probably aware, it's a part-time legislature. They are only in session between January and June, so it's a very compact time. And this is obviously something that all these individuals are doing on top of whatever their regular job is. That'll become important later on when I talk about something else. Just to go through these real quick and explain the ones that aren't painfully obvious. Rhythm and blues designated as official state music. Allowing theaters statewide to sell alcoholic beverages as a House bill up right now. Regarding Town of Bristol nonprofits and taxation, this bill allows for payment in lieu of taxes by nonprofits. It allows Bristol to kind of set up that mechanism within the town. The funding for after-school programs, Senate Bill 2190, and let me find it, funding for after-school programs, including arts and workforce development, House Bill 7915 are similar. They're separate, but they have very parallel language. And they're both bills that seek to provide $2 million to RIDE to grant out through an RFP process to either local governments, municipalities, or nonprofits for after-school programming. And in the case of the latter bill, the addition was also programming related to workforce development, and arts is included in that. Requiring state meetings to offer translation services, allowing cities and towns to set up tourism improvement districts and assess fees to local businesses within them. The title says it a bit, but essentially it allows for businesses, organizations within a geographic community to come together, propose a tourism improvement district, submit it to the municipality to be approved, and go through a process that would then allow entities that are within that tourism improvement district to be assessed taxes that can then be used to fulfill a tourism plan and tourism improvement plan that's been proposed as part of that district. And then lastly, increasing the motion picture tax credit cap to $40 million. So, even in the instance where none of these particular pieces of legislation speak to you or your priorities, to Meg's point, it's still really important for you to have an established relationship with your legislators, because in the long run, it's super important, right? For things that are going to come up and come down the pike. Something that someone I work with says frequently that I always like is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Particularly when it came to the pandemic, the arts did get a fair amount of state support in Rhode Island, which is great. That kind of support, you can imagine, for arts and culture would be even more robust if there were, coalitions of cultural entities who were reaching out to legislators on a regular basis in an organized way. In lieu of that being possible right now in Rhode Island, we do not have a state arts advocacy organization or a state cultural advocacy organization. Having independent relationships, your individual relationships with your legislators, is really important. One of the soapboxes I get on in every grant workshop we do, when we were in our strategic planning process a few years ago, who even knows when right now, one of the things that came up was that we as an agency were helpful as advocates for the arts and culture in Rhode Island. And what I say to everyone is, actually, yes, we do educate and we do advocate, but the responsibility for advocacy really lies with you all. We're state employees. Our voice only goes so far. I always bring up to people in grant workshops that I'm always surprised at how many people get their state legislators wrong when they fill out their grant applications. You should absolutely have them on your invite list for everything you're doing. To Meg's point, invite them to your events, cultivate and establish relationships with them, even just to do the advocacy piece, like Meg said, of just educating and make them aware that you're in their communities and you're doing important things. This is something that comes up in my conversations with people. People sometimes feel, and I have felt this way too, like, oh, I don't want to bother them, like they're super busy. They work for you. Yes, this again, as I said, is their part-time job in addition to whatever else they're doing, but they still work for you. You're not inconveniencing them. It's actually helpful if people are proactive and reach out to them, because with everything they're juggling, if you're in there as a content area expert talking about the importance of museums in your community and the kind of work that you do, they're like, okay, great, thank you for this information. They don't really have staff per se, it's not like Congress in that way. So by being proactive, you'll help them do their job better. Many cultural advocates default to economic impact arguments when communicating with state legislators. This completely makes sense. But something we all know is that if you're talking to your uncle or your cousin who's not really that interested in public funding for arts and culture or whatever, the economic impact argument is not what got people jazzed about, arts and culture museums. It's the experiences they have there. So, when possible, as Meg said, understanding where the person you're talking to kind of falls, what are their priorities and issues, what is their familiarity or interest with arts, culture, and museums, having that awareness and conversation, and trying to make that personal connection with people about, hey, like, what was a museum experience that really spoke to you? Like, what is something in your past that made you really excited about museums? Because that's why people are excited about museums, right? It's not necessarily economic impact. Anyway, so trying to weave that in as well. And something I put in here, I'm going to talk about a few different advocacy resources at the state and federal level, some of which Meg has mentioned, but one of them is something called the Creative States Coalition. So state arts agencies, as well as some other arts advocates are coming together. I'm sorry, state arts advocacy organizations. And some of that involves state arts agency representation are coming together to form a network that will support state and local level arts and culture advocacy, with the idea that this is not just something where there's a designated state advocate who joins these conversations. It's for anyone interested, it's for artists, etc., to support people in building their advocacy skills. So if you're really jazzed by what NEMA is doing here and you want to kind of tap into more of that, feel free to reach out to me about that one. This is just forming now. I'm just kind of watching and participating in conversations. And once it's kind of clear what the structure is and how they're opening up participation, I'll communicate that with you. Some things that Meg mentioned, federal level arts advocacy and resources. For those of you who are not familiar, Americans for the Arts is a national arts advocacy organization. They're not, what's the word I'm looking for? They're kind of general or broad in terms of how they're advocating for the arts. So a lot of their research and data is associated with economic impact of arts and culture institutions on communities, and also the social impact of arts and culture on communities as well. Some great resources there and some user-friendly graphic things that one can use in your conversations with people. Americans for the Arts is a 501c3. They have a 501c4 arm called Americans for the Arts Action Fund that does more, lobbying. Their emails are free to sign up for, and it's very helpful as a way to understand, what's being discussed at the federal level that might be of interest to you all. And then particularly during the pandemic, they did an excellent job of updating people about grants, like the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, and also providing drop-in support hours for that. There are, I believe, 7 creative economy related bills being discussed in Congress right now. It's kind of a wild, awesome time to see all that kind of come to bear. So worth you all looking into and worth you all kind of looking to Arts Action Fund. The National Arts Action Summit is something that is put on by Americans for the Arts and Cultural Partners. It is basically an arts advocacy boot camp that happens this year between March 28th and March 30th. I am the state arts advocacy captain for Rhode Island for Americans for the Arts. And what that means is, as a part of the National Arts Action Summit, I schedule meetings with our congressional delegation in the month of April. And I ask for people to come and be speakers or just come and be silent witnesses and show their support on Zoom. That's of interest to you, please email me about that. Again, that's my email. I'll drop into the chat if you have questions. And that's it from me. And I'm also happy to take questions if there's time, Meg and Dan.
Well, I'm super
got plenty of
curious.
time.
I'm super curious about the local legislation that you mentioned, and if there's any there that you see as, kind of these are most likely, or these are the things that could use the extra push and amplification, or.
Yeah, so I will say that right now we're without an executive director, and that person was the one who really followed the legislation in depth. I'm aware of it. I'm more the federal level person. So
Right.
It's hard for me to speak to like chances and possibilities there with the level of knowledge I have. I will say that really coming in to a meeting with any awareness about, hey, I heard there's this bill, I'm not sure how much you're aware of it. It sounds really great, blah, blah, blah. Having that kind of conversation at the very least could be helpful.
Yeah.
Next score, I'm really interested in this Bristol, Rhode Island pilot payment legislation. And I don't know if anybody else knows more about it, but thanks for bringing it to our attention, because we tend to, as an organization, try to follow and track whatever, these payment in lieu of taxes bills, to just understand what's behind them and the like. And I don't know if this is a refile. I do know that Bristol has been paying pilots as has Providence and a few others. But it's really interesting, this movement, it's been happening where they're trying to legislate pilot payments, which is really kind of an oxymoron, because I don't know if everybody's familiar with it, but payment in lieu of taxes is usually, sort of an informal agreement between a municipality and the nonprofits, principally directed at the bigger ones, educational institutions and hospitals and the like, but we smaller institutions can get caught in the crossfire a little bit. But when you legislate them, then it becomes a tax, basically, so it's kind of an interesting push and pull where a lot of these communities are trying to formalize the arrangements a little bit more. Do you know anything more about it, Todd, or anybody else on the call?
The only thing I know is that in the legislation, it just specifies that the relationship and actions in terms of payment in lieu of taxes are established by the municipality and have to be recorded in some way. So there's a flexibility, like you're saying, within that. It might be that they're interested in targeting a very large nonprofit or nonprofits in their town versus the smaller ones. It's not that they have to necessarily do it with all of them. Obviously, like you're saying, in Providence, it's a big thing because Brown owns so much of the city, as well as the universities and hospitals and things like that. But it is interesting to see a piece of legislation like that come up in smaller communities.
I can't think of in Bristol any larger nonprofits. There's the Art Museum and with the Hafenreffer, I think, or something is there, and
Isn't there farm museums?
the Art Museum. So yeah, it's interesting, but it's something that we need to really kind of watch because in general terms, we have to watch that the smaller institutions aren't kind of sucked up into that. I know in Boston anyway, there's like a threshold. You don't really have to worry about it unless you have a budget over XYZ. But well, anyway, Meg, get on it. No.
And what I can do, y'all, when I drop in some links I mentioned I would drop in after I'm done doing Q&A, I'll also drop in a link to the legislation about that, the existing bill that's there, and oh my God, and a couple of the other ones, like the after school programming ones might be of interest, and the tourism improvement districts, which is interesting to look at and think about it as well.
Well, thank you so much, Todd. That was a huge amount of information and lots of great leads for people to be following and everything. So we really, really appreciate it. That was super informative. I do want to let people know that if you are feeling really fired up about advocacy, we, the NEMA staff and board, are looking for some kind of citizen members to join our advocacy advisory committee. So if you are interested in kind of repping Rhode Island and following what's happening in your state and helping us figure out what our ongoing advocacy priorities are and things like that, we are looking to expand our advocacy team. So if you are at all interested in joining the committee, you should give me drop me a line. I will put my email in the chat for you. And then you can help me get on following things like pilot payment legislation and things like that. Because I love all the states in New England, but I can't read absolutely everybody's news every week. So 6 states is a little too much for me to do all by myself. So I would love some help. And Kathy's been on the advocacy committee before, so she can tell you how much fun it is.
Yeah, I mean, I can say it's really interesting to hear what's happening in other states and also to put your eye on this. And I thought, Todd, you framed it really well in terms of, the range of impacts that we have and the range of impacts that legislation's happening impact our work. And so the kinds of things we can have influence. And if you sort of take Meg's perspective that advocacy isn't necessarily scary lobbying. It's just the same thing we do with education or development of letting people know what we're doing and making the connections to why things are relevant. That just becomes part of our work. But it's really nice to be connected with other folks in other states and get ideas from them. So, and Meg is great to work with.
I did not pay her to say that in advance. All right, so does anybody have any other questions or?
Well, if nobody else does, I'm just going to actually put in a comment about how impressive Rhode Island is, your congressional delegation, and how fortunate you are because, the phrase of punching above your weight, I don't know if you can use a boxing metaphor in this regard, but, I know specifically Jack Reed and Sheldon Whitehouse have been incredible supporters of arts, culture, museums nationally. And as a matter of fact, I know Jack Reed's office has received what is the recognition, the congressional recognition, Meg, at Advocacy Day and whatever. They've been really point people in the past on IMLS funding and championing that, our field generally. And so you're very fortunate. Whenever we go in to pay a visit, especially to Senator Reed's office, is always very welcoming. And, that's something that I think that you all have a real advantage of. Not a lot of pushback congressionally for what it is that we do.
And if I can just add one thing to that, Dan, too. Senator Reed, and I'm going to get this wrong, he co-chairs the committee in Interior Appropriations that signs off on the NEA and NEH's budget. I don't know if that's also IMLS, because that's a bit out of my range of expertise. He also, one of his senior staff people is Moira Lenahan, who's been with him for quite a long time, and she is a fierce and passionate advocate for arts and culture education. So she is in constant conversation with us about that as well. So just know that if you are in conversation with that office, like Dan said, amazing. We have a really amazing delegation in terms of their understanding the importance of culture to communities and to their longevity and strength. And also you have someone like Moira who is like proactively interested in hearing about information related to those issues and what's happening in communities in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, Moira is fantastic.
All right, well, people are gathering their thoughts for any last questions or final words. I will just do a brief reminder for kind of what to go out and do today and tomorrow and beyond. So if you are planning on doing some social media advocacy today, which we strongly encourage, you can be reaching out to your various elected officials' offices, use their Twitter handles, use the New England Museum Weeks and RI Museums or Museums Advocacy hashtags so that we can help find your posts and boost them. Think about reaching out to your members and talk about why advocating for museums and other cultural organizations is so important. If you want to be writing letters to any of your elected officials' offices, we do have a sample letter to legislators that you can take and personalize, available on our website. Scarlett dropped the link in the chat a little earlier. Also, feel free to make phone calls, etc. And if you want to be reaching out to your federal level Senate and Congress representatives, I did drop the information from AAM about what their talking points were 2 weeks ago. So the things that have to do with fiscal year 22 have all been resolved at this point. So it's moving on to asks for fiscal year 23. So you can ignore a couple of the talking points that are in there because they've actually solved that in the last week or so. So yeah, go forth, advocate, have fun. We really appreciate your being here. Thank you for being the ones who care enough to show up. You make my heart happy. And thanks again to Todd for all of that fabulous information. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, everyone, and have a great, as Meg said, happy advocating.
See everybody.